So let's make the best of it. Chapter 18, Subdivision and Developments. In this chapter, we're going to describe the various methods of developing and subdividing land. We're going to identify the impacts of environmental regulations and other laws on the sales, health and safety, and building regulations. When developing and subdividing land, let's see, assemblage is when you combine two or more lots into one, making a larger parcel out of them. The increase in value is known as plottage value. Don't need to add that to your definition list or study that. You will not get that term. Subdivider is somebody who buys undeveloped acreage and they divide it into smaller lots and they get all the environmental reports and engineering reports and the permits required in order to legally now start construction on that subdivided land. So a subdivider may just be somebody who buys that undeveloped acreage and does all of the permitting and engineering and legal stuff to be able to subdivide it and prepare it to get built on. And then they could sell that land to a developer for a marked up price because it's ready to build on. But sometimes the subdivider is the builder themselves. Okay? So the developer is somebody who builds homes or buildings on other lots, and then they sell them. Sometimes a subdivider can also be the builder. Now, what is a subdivision? Well, in New Jersey, when a second lot is sold off a larger parcel, the development is classified as a subdivision. And the state of New Jersey allows municipalities to decide what constitutes a major subdivision that would require a public hearing and what constitutes a minor subdivision which does not. Minor subdivisions are like one or two lots, maybe three or four. It depends on the municipality. They do not require new streets normally, or off-site improvements, or public hearings for approvals. A major subdivision requires public hearings to get an approval. They have a lot more issues they need to address, like the impact it's going to have on the community. All those additional homes may have children that would have more children taking up space in the school systems. They may have to deal with the additional water and sewage, and they need to deal with the garbage pickups and the additional need for police and EMS and all that stuff. So a major subdivision requires some issues being discussed. And the impact it may have on the community. So examples of issues for larger subdivisions may be the roads, the traffic, the burden on the local school districts, public works services, emergency services like police, fire, and waste removal, water and sewage treatment, and the drainage and environmental impacts are all issues that must be addressed when getting approvals for major subdivisions. Land planning typically precedes the actual subdividing process. You got to plan on how you're going to subdivide that land first, which must comply with the municipality's master plan on how they manage the municipality. Planning boards and planning commissioners are often part of those discussions and consulted with. Dedication is giving land to the government for a public use, like streets, schools, and parks. So if within that subdivision, they make streets and roads, are they going to keep them private? Or are they going to dedicate them to the municipality to now become public streets that the municipality has to maintain? There has to be assurance by bonding that the sewers and street costs are going to be paid for. And compliance, they need to make sure that the planning, at the planning stage, that all the plans comply with the local zoning ordinances governing the use of and lot sizes, and fire and safety ordinances, and building and construction codes, and environmental, etc. Often a percolation test is also required. For short, this is referred to as a perk test in the industry. A perk test is a test of how well soil absorbs liquids for drainage and runoff. Or if you're installing a septic system, that water flows out of the tank after it's treated, and then it goes to a drain field, and it needs to be soaked in by the ground, the land. So you need to test to see how well that land absorbs all of that water, especially for a big complex. So a perk test tests how well the soil absorbs liquids. So it tests its capacity. So let's highlight dedication of land for streets or schools or parks. That is giving land to the government. That's what dedication is. Giving land to the government for streets, schools, and parks. And then go down and highlight that a percolation test of the soil's absorption and drainage capacities. And I'm going to show you a video on the next slide that shows you how a percolation test is actually performed. It's very scientific, you're going to see. All right, everybody got that note? Okay. So here's that video where I'll show you how a percolation test gets done. This is a video from This Old House. You guys know that, familiar with that program there, This Old House? Let me crank up the volume a little bit, make sure you can hear them, and let's play it.
One of the first things to consider when building a house like this out in the country is a septic plan. What to do with the waste and water that needs to leave that building. Now, it needs to go into a septic system. There's a couple of key components to a septic system. One is a septic tank. Now, this tank will accept waste and water. Now, the solids will stay in the tank and be broken down over time by bacteria. But the water that'll pass through the tank will now go out through a leach field. Now, a leach field is a series of pipes, perforated pipes, that sit below the substrate of the soil, and the water will trickle or drip down through the ground. Now, to determine if you can even have a septic system, it starts with a perk test. Brendan Zabrickis with the town of Essex, you've had your share of perk tests, right?
I sure have.
So what's a perk test?
Well, that stands for percolation test, and it's a field test to simulate how wastewater will travel down through the soil once a septic system is built on top of it.
How fast it'll pass through, sort of like water going down through the coffee grounds in a filter.
That's a good analogy, yes.
Right. Okay. So what have you done to get us to this point?
Well, previous to this, we dug several deep holes, about 10 feet down into the ground.
Okay.
That allowed us to get a look at the various soil layers that you're going to find whenever you dig here in New England.
All right, so this is topsoil. What are you seeing? What am I seeing?
Well, as you just mentioned, this is your topsoil. Then you go through a layer known as subsoil. You then finally get down to a layer that is really the glacial material. In other words, the glacier brought it in.
Yeah.
We have determined that this is the most restrictive or most limiting layer in the soil profile. And the septic system code requires that we actually perform the perk test in that most limiting layer.
So you're testing at almost the worst place?
The worst place that you're going to have underneath that system, that's correct.
So that looks pretty dense right here, so not
That's
accept
right.
water too well?
That's exactly right. So what we did after that is, knowing what we had in the deep holes, we just had the machine dig down a shelf to the top of that most restrictive layer, and we're ready to dig a perk hole that's about 12 inches in diameter and about 18 inches deep.
Okay.
Then we're going to fill that hole with water and let the hole sit for a little while to make it saturated. That will be a great simulation of how soil will behave when it's wet underneath a leach facility. Then we will use a ruler to watch the rate at which the water drops down through the hole over time.
Yeah.
And that will give us what's called a perk rate, or percolation
So what
rate.
happens if the rate doesn't drop fast enough?
If it doesn't drop fast enough, that would be a limitation to the site that you may not be able to build a septic system in this particular
It's a pretty important test then.
It is very important. So now I'm just going to take this water, pour it into the hole against a board that I've already got set up.
What's the board do?
What this does is it puts the water into the hole more gently so that we do not stir up the fine material in there.
Yeah.
And we want to bring this water level up to about 12 inches, and we're going to maintain that level for about 15 minutes, again, to simulate saturated conditions in the soil.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll check that. We're about 9 so far, so we're going to need another bucket of water, Richard.
All right, Brennan, it has been 15 minutes.
We want to see the time it takes to go from 9 inches down to 6 inches. Well, it dropped down to 6 inches in about 27 minutes.
So is that good?
Yeah, I've seen quicker than that, but it's somewhere right in the middle.
But you're telling us that we passed the test, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for your help on the perk test.
Of course.
Thanks for watching. This old house is...
All right, so that's how a perk test gets done. Just to show you. All right. Very scientifical, huh? Dig a hole and put some water in the hole and count how long it takes for the ground to soak it up. Well, that's essentially what's getting done anyway. So it's just common sense to do that. That's how science is done. We test the soil. All right. So land plan, some issues with land planning, with subdividing. The subdivider seeks out raw land that they could profitably subdivide. They determine if the proposed use is consistent with the zoning. They then locate financial backers. What? They didn't have the finances in place yet, and they get all this stuff done? Yeah. Usually when they're doing big projects like this, these are commercial projects. They put an offer in to purchase the land, but there's a lot of contingencies in that offer. It's subject to, being able to subdivide the land and get all the building permits, to get all the environmental approvals and all that stuff before they ever start to locate financial backers, and then initiate marketing strategies before they even start the construction. Title to the individual parcels is transferred as lots are sold using a blanket mortgage, which has that partial release clause in it. Remember that blanket mortgage. And impact fees are often paid paid to the municipality by a developer to help the community cope with the added demand for its use, for the use of its services, like using the police, fire, schools, garbage, public works, water and sewage disposal. But what I've been finding lately, a lot of these Meridia projects that have been going on and other developers in the area doing these high-rise apartments that we've been seeing going up in every town in New Jersey lately. A lot of these mayors have not been charging the developer impact fees. My question is why? I recently ran for politics here. I didn't win in my town because they did a little dirty, underhanded stuff. But either way, the questions that I was bringing up is how come you're not charging? First of all, in all these developments, how come you're not requiring the builder to have any low-income or affordable housing units in those buildings? And then second, how come you're not charging them any impact fees? Impact fees could be charged to the developer to, I used to refer to them as the legal bribes that they charge the developer in order to get their project approved. Okay. It could be requiring them to donate a few police cars or an ambulance or a fire truck or a street sweeper or like 1% of the sale of each unit will need to be paid to the municipality to help cope with the added demand for its services. But I've been finding a lot of cities have been doing it in a different way instead of charging impact fees lately. And it's kind of convoluted. I haven't figured out exactly what they're getting out of it because the developer is getting years of tax free, of having that structure there tax free, making money off of it before they start actually paying to the municipality the taxes. So, what's in it for the municipality? Other than possible payoffs to mayors, you know, I haven't figured that one out yet. So I'm working on my research on that. All right, so let's write on page 341 under this sentence where it says title to the individual parcels of subdivided land is transferred as lots are sold. Right underneath that, using a blanket mortgage with a partial release clause. And then down below, do the highlight of the impact fees. Okay, everybody good? Everybody still writing? No?
Good.
Okay. So a blanket mortgage, once again, is a loan that's secured by more than one parcel. It's used to finance subdivision developments. A partial release clause is one that allows you, it has a modified alienation clause in it. Remember, the alienation clause is also known as the due on sale clause that says anytime you sell a property or transfer ownership, the loan needs to be repaid in full. So these blanket mortgages, they're used to finance subdivision developments. So they have a partial release clause in them that allows you to sell a smaller lot off of a larger one and then only pay back a portion of the loan as the smaller portions of the lots are sold off until eventually the entire loan is repaid. So you could use this image to see. So you use a blanket mortgage to purchase the whole property here, and then you subdivide it, build a house maybe on this one and sell off this one lot. And so then they have to pay 1/6 of the loan back. They sell off another portion of the lot. Well, then they sell off they pay back 2/6 of the loan and so on and so forth, right? That's what the partial release clause allows. Okay, here's what a municipal tax map looks like. It's made up of lots and blocks. The areas with you can see the dark bold in a box, or sometimes they're in circles. Those will be the lot numbers. I'm sorry, the block numbers. Every city block in your municipality has a number to it. And this is what the tax maps look like. They're designated by block and lot number. So like, for example, this is block, let me see here. We got block 334 over here. And you can see all the lots are numbered consecutively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.01, 7.02, 8.01, 8.02. And it goes all the way around 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So block number 334 in Linden has 23 lots on it. Okay. And each lot is numbered. So these are like little subdivisions. And if you were to take the maps of all the subdivisions and put them together, well, now you got that's how you build up the city's lots and blocks numbers here. So you got the street names, you got the block numbers, and the lots are numbered. So this is what it looks like. When you zoom in on it a little bit more. It also shows you the dimensions of the lot sizes. So in part of the land planning, they got to figure out the street patterns that the developer is going to use. Are they going to use that classic gridiron pattern that looks like a couple of ice trays here, but they're square or rectangular lots? Or are they going to go with the curvilinear pattern or some other pattern? And subdivision types, are they going to go with the conventional gardens estate, a clustered estate style, or some other style? So if you look at the conventional gardens versus the clustered estate style here, they both have approximately the same amount of housing units, 368 on the left, 366 on the right. On the left, with the conventional gardens estate, people have larger yards, larger properties. Whereas the clustered estates, they have smaller properties because it's clustering units closer together on smaller lots so that they could have more open space and parkland. So as you could see, there's 23 and a half acres of parkland here, whereas on the left, the conventional gardens estates has only 1.6 acres of parkland. But everybody has a larger yard, a larger lot for their house to be on. And conventional garden estate over here in this section, they have 12,500 square foot lot sizes. And in this example on the right, it's 7,500 square foot for that same area of land that they subdivide if they're using the clustered estates. See, these are just different approaches that they could use. Here's a small subdivision. So basically, in black here, I outlined the property's boundaries, and here's the street. So the property owner here, they subdivided their property into 8 lots, and they built a street on it. This is called a cul-de-sac street. It's a street that at the end, it has that wide circle area. Anybody know why they got that wide circle area at the end of the street and it's not just a dead end street the way they used to make them?
Well, cars can pass through easier. Yes.
Well, it's more specifically so fire trucks can do a U-turn instead of having to back up down the road, and garbage trucks and city service vehicles like that. But yeah, it's basically so that they could turn around. So a map of a subdivision is called a plat map. So a plat is a map of a subdivision, indicating the location and the boundaries of the individual properties within the subdivision. As you could see in this small subdivision, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? Now, when they submit the plans for this subdivision for approval, they're going to have to note on the plans if they're dedicating this street or if it's going to remain private. Because it was, after all, built on private property. You could build a street on your own property. It's just a matter of now, are you going to dedicate it to the municipality and it'll become a city street, or are you going to keep it private? And you get to name it. So a plat is a map of a subdivision indicating the location and boundaries of each of the individual properties. It is also one of the legal descriptions of land that we're going to learn about in Chapter 19. So let's highlight the definition here on page 342. It's at the bottom of the page. Plat of a subdivision is a map of the development indicating the location and boundaries of the individual properties. All right, we'll leave off here and take our lunch break now. Yes, it is that time already. All right, so in land planning and doing the subdivision plans, they also need to discuss the covenants and restrictions that may be placed in any deeds. Restrictions are placed in deeds by private parties, not by governments. So only the developer, the owner, can place these restrictions in deeds. We call them restrictive covenants. And often with subdivisions, there's a master deed, and the restrictions would be placed in the master deed. And then they could only be referenced to in each individual person's deed. That's another way that it can restrictions can be placed in deeds. Governments have their own parties on powers on how they restrict how somebody can use their property through those government powers that we went over in an earlier chapter. You know, they have the eminent domain. They got the police powers. They have their own powers on how they do it. It's the private parties are the only ones that can place restrictions in deeds, and estates and land that are based on restrictions are known as fee determinable, defeasible, or conditional fee estates. As long as those conditions are not violated, you remain the owner of the property. But if you violate those restrictions, you have the possibility of losing it. Now, can you possibly change that or remove that restriction? Probably not. I could go over that. I actually have a video of an attorney that goes over that. I'll put that on our Facebook page. Now, there's a moratorium is a halt to any further development in the area. Add that definition to your list as well. So if the government should issue a moratorium, even people who have been approved for construction permits, if they did not record those approvals in the public record and the municipality calls a moratorium, then no further construction can take place. You can't even start your project, even if you had approvals for your project. However, if you recorded those approvals in the public record, even if they call a moratorium, you could start your project and do your project because you recorded those interests in the public record. Now, the FHA has a minimum standard for new construction materials and occupancy. The majority of the units should be owner occupants if you're going to use an FHA loan to buy in a condominium complex anyway. Development costs are estimated to be 4 to 6 times the cost of the raw land to develop a subdivision. In case you were wondering, just a little factoid there, that's all that is. Now, density zoning, another term you need to know, is zoning that restricts the maximum number of homes that can be built per acre. Or another way of saying that, it's zoning for the most homes that can be built per acre. I think the book words it the first way, but this is just the understanding that it can be worded both of these ways. That's what density zoning is. Zoning for the maximum amount of homes that can be built per acre. Okay. So I guess let's do the highlights here now. Dedication, moratorium, restrictive covenants, and the types of estates and land that are based on restrictions on page 343. Okay. Just do those highlights, write those notes. Let me know when you got it.
Got it.
All right. Page 344. So here's just that factoid about development cost. You don't need to highlight it up top here. That's 4 to 6 times the cost of the raw land to build a development. You know, when you factor in all the things like expenses like the installation of sewers and septic systems, water mains, wells, storm drains, landscaping, the street lights, the mass earthworks removal, site grading, paving, engineering fees, the broker's commissions, inspections, operating costs, filing and legal fees, sale costs, and other overhead. In certain areas, a subdivider may also be required to give financial assistance to school districts or park districts, et cetera, in the form of a fixed subsidy. What would we call that? What do we call that? When a developer has to pay certain fees to the municipality to get their plans approved. We call it impact fees. And then we have density zoning down here at the bottom. Density zoning ordinances restrict the maximum amount of number of houses that can be built per acre. Or like I said, zoning for the most homes that can be built per acre. Okay, so when you buy new construction, you would assume that the land that is being built on is not contaminated, right? Well, in the past, people made that assumption as well. And it was actually built on, you had new construction that was built on former dump sites, garbage dump sites. So they were highly contaminated. So problems with past use, the soil contamination. Future buyers could face liability for the cleanup costs under CERCLA, right? Because who's responsible for any hazardous substance on their property? The owner. Now, EIS are environmental impact studies. These are reports that could have an impact on your project. They're required before any federal project that affect quality of life, like contamination. It requires info about the planned project and possible solutions. An environmental impact, a check for contamination to see if there's any rare species of animal or insect or whatever that's on that property. Traffic, how it's going to affect the traffic and drainage issues, etc. How it's going to impact the environment, basically. If human remains are ever found on the property, well, that'll put a halt to your construction project, right? We need to find out if there's a crime scene there. Was somebody just murdered and their body dumped and buried there? Or was that a historic site of significance? Are those old bones or those new bones, right? Either way, it's going to put a halt on your project for a while. Like this famous example about the World Trade Centers. Did I show you guys this video yet, or was that a previous class I showed? You know, where under the World Trade Centers, they found that ship that put a halt to the construction of that Freedom Tower for a little while until they could excavate and have the historic societies come in and remove all that stuff and examine the site. Yeah, here's that.
With Plymouth Rock, I never wonder if I'm covered.
Good for you.
For home and auto.
More saving.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty significant find. It's the kind of thing that archaeologists are always hoping to find in landfill deposits. It's a ship. It was probably put here around in the early 1800s. We know that this area, this whole block, was filled in between about 1790s and the 1830s. So we figure the ship probably predates that. and was used as part of the landfilling process. So they filled the ship with dirt and rocks, and in conjunction with timber cribbing features or landfill retaining structures on either side, sunk them to the bottom of the river and used it to create new land along the waterfront. At this point, we really don't know much. So we kind of just have to continue our analysis, see what what's under the boat, what's in the dirt around it, and see if that can tell us anything. We're assuming it was placed here in the early 1800s based on historic maps and how they show us how the shoreline progressed. Basically, they would just sink it little by little and gradually extend the shoreline, and usually build new wharves and piers out into the river, leaving a slip in between so boats could continue to sail in and out. And then as waterfront land became more and more valuable and more necessary, they would continue filling in and extending the shoreline gradually. And it's tied into commerce and trade of the early 19th century. There have been ships found in the city before. There was a famous one on Water Street found in the early 1980s. And it's the kind of thing that everyone always hopes to find. It's an exciting find. It's a big find. It's something that's interesting. We can get a lot of information about it. It's a very unique part of history that, we wouldn't have access to otherwise.
And then it puts a halt to the construction in the area until they're done with that. They actually have documentaries on Discovery Channel and one of those other channels, Discovery, and one of those other History Channel maybe, put together a show all about the discovery of this and what they actually found at the site and what it means, The timbers, the wood that was used to create the hull of this ship was actually came from the same region and the same time frame as when the Liberty Bell was built, when the Liberty Bell was made, right? All right, so the environmental issues. The previous use of the land being considered for development should be carefully investigated on the outset. Chemical companies, dry cleaners, old farms and trash dumps and underground gas tanks, airports, warehouses, gas stations, and factories of all sorts may have produced potentially dangerous chemical wastes. And problems, this was discussed in Chapter 9, problems faced by unaware future owners could include liability for those cleanup costs, liability for health problems, unfavorable publicity, and restrictions on future use of the land. So, highlight federal agencies are required to conduct studies called Environmental Impact Studies, EIS, for any federal project that can affect the quality of the life, especially projects located in floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, or other environmentally fragile areas. Okay. So that's the EIS reports, the environmental impact studies that must be done before they could do any large developments there. It's on page 344. Okay. So New Jersey has environmental regulations. They're enforced by the New Jersey DEP. Okay, the EPA is the federal agency and the DEP is the New Jersey agency. So what gives the DEP, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, authority to regulate certain areas within the state? Well, it's usually legislation that was created that gave them that authority. And it's usually named after the areas that they regulate, like the wetlands, under the Wetlands Protection Act of 1970. The Highlands Water Protection Act. The Pinelands is the Pinelands Protection Act. CAFRA is for the Coastal Area Facility Review Act. And Waterfront Development Act is for the waterfront areas. So developers should consult with the guide called Buy Bob. Before you buy, before you build, before they do any development here in New Jersey. There's a page here, Buy Bob, on the DEP's website that they could see if they need to get anybody's specific permission before they can do the construction or any kind of development. They got to determine if the site is regulated by the Division of Land Use Regulations first. So here's just those laws again. breaking down the the Highlands Water Protection Act protects the New Jersey drinking water when paving over 1 acre or more. The Pinelands Protection Act regulates 22% of the state's land, which is the Pinelands National Reserve, the Pine Barrens. I showed you guys in an earlier chapter the video of the Pinelands, the Pine Barrens, right? And how barren and like you can't see any developments or housing or anything for miles, it appears. Wetland Act requires a permit to excavate, fill, build, or build on certain areas, covers both coastal areas as well as inland freshwater areas. However, the Wetlands Act, President Obama extremely expanded this, giving the EPA broad sweeping regulatory powers, probably more than they should have, because you give somebody more power, they're more bound to abuse it. So now, if you have a farm and say you have a puddle because you got all that farm equipment maybe, and you get mud and you get a little rut in the road, your driveway. If that rains and it fills that enough that it becomes a huge puddle, that the environmental agencies can now regulate your land because of that water that's sitting on it. It's so ridiculous. And they actually went after farmers and landowners so that they could regulate their properties or try to take them away. There was a lot of lawsuits that came about over it. You probably did not hear it in the media because, most of the media was in bed with Obama, and backed him up on most of his stuff. But there was a lot of stories, a lot of lawsuits that came about when environmental agency were given permission to regulate areas they normally were not allowed to, even in desert area. There was a farmer that since before this country was formed, his family's been farming this land, and then they have their cattle graze on the public land in the area. Well, after this occurred, you had all these agents that went out there with their weapons and started threatening him that he couldn't graze his animals on the land that he's been grazing on since before we even became a country, because that's federal land, and there is a rare desert turtle that sometimes comes across it, and they don't want them messing up that desert turtle. Well, I don't know. The desert turtle's been there and they've been fine for hundreds of years while their cattle's been grazing all this time, That's kind of like the excuses that in California, the governor there gives for why they reroute the water directly out to the ocean instead of to those catch basins that are used for fighting fires and for streams, because there's a little minnow fish or something, an endangered species of some kind of little minnow, some kind of little fish. So that's the excuse of why they allow the entire area to bust out in these huge fires every year, and they don't maintain the water because they're trying to protect the wildlife. All right. Well, coastal regulations impact the coast are covered by the CAFRA. That's clustering for open space and planned unit developments. And then we have the Waterfront Development Act. This covers the areas that are regulated outside of what CAFRA regulates. So the DEP must first approve plans for waterfront development on any navigable water or stream. After Sandy, FEMA redrew the flood maps too, giving them an even wider area to regulate. Okay, so we have something called the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, and these rules are intended to protect the public from unscrupulous developers and marketers, from undue sales pressure, like with timeshare sales, those out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents. Buyers have 7 calendar days to cancel contracts for the purchase or lease of such lands. New construction only, of course. Advertisements for new construction out-of-state properties marketed in New Jersey and large in-state subdivisions with 100 lots or more, or at least 10 units, if there's common area elements involved, stipulate that all contracts for disclosures must be available in the same language the property was advertised in. The contracts and disclosures must be professionally translated by multilingual legal experts familiar with terminology, legal terminology as well, because there are some words in the everyday English language that have a separate legalese meaning to them, you know, so they want to make sure it's going to be translated properly if they do. Let me just adjust this slide a little bit. I got to get to which slide that's on. Just want to change this wording around. With 100 lots or with at least 100 lots or with at least 10 units or if common area elements are involved. Oh. Let me see. I just reworded this a little bit. I just want to make sure it makes sense by reading it aloud. New Jersey and large in-state subdivisions with at least 100 lots or with at least 10 units, if common area elements are involved, stipulate that all contracts and disclosures must be available in the same. Okay, so there you go. That makes sense. Because I worded it that way. I spoke it that way, but it wasn't written that way. I just want to, I like the way that I said it, so I wanted to reword it there. Okay, so this language requirement applies to all properties advertised in New Jersey, not just new ones, from both in and out of state. So the language requirement that all the contracts and disclosures must be available in the language that it was advertised in. Let me see. So this language requirement that requires this language requirement that all new construction advertised in New Jersey applies to all properties advertised in New Jersey, not just the new ones from both in and out of state, to have all contracts and disclosures available in the same language. That the property was advertised in. There we go. This language requirement that all new construction advertised in New Jersey also applies to all properties not just the new ones from both in and out of state, to have all contracts and disclosures available in the same language that the property was advertised in. Okay. Because there's a lot of talks about new construction has to have this, but also existing construction has to have it as well. So that's what I'm just trying to clarify there. It seems like it's a little confusing. It's basically all properties because there's one law that says all new construction has to be advertised in a language. You have to have all the contracts and disclosures available in the same language as you advertised it in. But there's also a law that says if you advertise properties for sale in New Jersey, even if they're resale properties, then all the contracts and disclosures have to be available in the same language as well. So that's all I was trying to update there in that slide. Okay, so that's the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. We can highlight it on 345 and 346, all that information here. And down here where it says Real Estate Sales Commission rules also address non-New Jersey properties. Write all properties over there because it's not just for non-New Jersey properties. All properties that are advertised in New Jersey in languages other than English, subsequent forms must be available to the prospective purchaser in the same language that was used in the original advertisement. So advertising in languages requiring disclosures in the same language for new and existing properties. It applies to both new and existing properties. I'll just write that. The same language applies to both new and existing properties. Let me know when everybody got everything.
Yeah.
Anybody still writing notes or highlighting? No? Okay. So Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. These rules are intended to protect the public from unscrupulous developers and marketers from undue sales pressure, like with timeshare sales. It says buyers have 7 calendar days to cancel contracts for the purchase or lease of such lands. That's for new construction only when it comes to out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents. Advertisements for new construction of out-of-state properties marketed in New Jersey and large in-state subdivisions with 100 lots or more, or those with common elements with at least 10 units, stipulate that all contracts and disclosures must be available in the same language the property is advertised in. The language requirement applies to all properties advertised in New Jersey, not just the new ones, from both in and out of state. So here on page 346, under New Jersey land sales, we could highlight that, and we could write here, the registration and disclosure requirements apply to the original offering, not to single resales. That means new construction. So that's talking about if a New Jersey subdivision falls within the requirements of the act, the buyer again has the right to cancel a contract within 7 days. That only deals with new construction, that 7-day right of rescission. We have it? Anybody still writing?
No, I have it.
And the UCC, the Uniform Construction Code, that's the state's minimum standard for construction. It's a database of all the building and construction minimum standards, the code, the building codes, which are maintained and enforced by the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs. It regulates construction, alteration, renovation, occupancy, and use of all buildings. If your municipality doesn't have its own building code enforcement officials, either way, the DCA inspects buildings and schools and commercial properties like large shopping centers and buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit the owner lives in. We call that the green card inspection, remember? So the state's minimum standard for construction and building, we're going to write that here above the UCC, Uniform Construction Code, UCC. Now, this is good to know here, so I put a little bracket around it. Because some people, they don't know. They think that, well, any new construction you do has to be up to the current building codes, right? Well, what if you have an existing structure and maybe something's messed up on it and you know you need to repair it? Some people get scared in doing that because they think they then need to bring their entire building up to code and they can't afford to do that. So this little bit of guidance can be useful to you in guiding those people. Existing buildings do not have to conform to the newer standards of building codes as they change over time, unless they're found to be unsafe. When alterations or repair costs are more than half the value of an existing building, however, the entire building must be brought up to code. When alterations amount to between 25 to 50% of the building value, only the new construction must conform. So you don't need to bring the entire building up to code if less than 50% or only up to 50% of the building value is affected. Over 50%, well, then the whole entire building needs to be brought up to code. Okay, you guys got the highlights, the notes, the markings?
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one you will get on exam. The New Warranty Builders and Registration Act. So all new construction in New Jersey must come with a 10-year builder's warranty. And they cannot self-warranty. They have to pay for this warranty. They have to buy it from the DCA in Trenton. So basically, they're buying the warranty from the state. So New Warranty and Builders Registration Act requires all builders of new homes must register a warranty against new home defects for up to 10 years. It's basically a 10-year warranty. Purchase and they has to be purchased and registered with the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs there in Trenton. Remember, enforcement, if no local building code enforcement inspectors are available and they don't share these services with the neighboring towns, the state will conduct those inspections and enforcement activities from the DCA. The inspectors are coming from the DCA. Before any construction, alteration, demolition, or change of use of occupancy of a building can be undertaken, construction permits must be issued. Okay. So you guys got this highlighted too? So how do construction permits work? Well, the UCC, the Uniform Construction Code, requires a construction permit before any construction, alteration, demolition, or change of use of a building can be undertaken. Applicants must provide info like the location of the property, construction plans, estimated cost of the work, the names and addresses of the owners, and the designated contractors that are going to be doing the work. The local construction official then must inspect the application and the property to determine whether it conforms to the requirements of the code. And then within 20 days, they must either approve the plans and issue a permit or reject it in writing with the cause for the rejection. If rejected, the applicant may revise the plans to meet the requirements or appeal their rejection to the Construction Board of Appeals. And once issued, a construction permit may be revoked if it contained any false or misleading information or omissions, or if the construction is not started within 12 months of the permit issue date, or if the work is suspended for 3 months or longer after the work had begun. So those are the rules on how construction permits work. Now, in reality, do all towns obey the laws and rules of the state? No. They straight up, they don't. My town, they try to screw with you. A couple of towns may try to do this, where say you issue, you need to get some work that was done. You need to get the permit to do some plumbing, some electrical, and maybe some framing, right? So you submit all 3 permits to the city to get the work done. How long should it take you to get those permits back, those approvals or rejections back?
20 days.
20 days. They're going to different departments to get approved, right? But yet my town, you try to do that, sometimes you'd be lucky if you get it in 60 days. Because they're like, well, it first has to go through plumbing, and then we'll forward it on to the electrical, and then we'll forward it on to the building department for the framing. No, that's not the way that works. It's supposed to go out. You submit those plans, you pay for those permits, they're supposed to give you an answer within 20 days. It doesn't go to one department where then they max it out, then you got to wait for them to issue the permit, and then it goes over to the next department, and then they have to examine the plans, and then they forward it to the next department. That's not how it works. It'll take forever to get any construction done that way. But sometimes if the city wants to screw with you for whatever reason, they do stupid things like this.
Do you know that New Jersey is one of the few states that doesn't require contractors to take any classes or any continuing education? California, Florida, they require contractors to have a certain amount of education.
Well, you still have to conform to the building codes. So whether
Well,
you're
yeah,
training or not, you need to still follow the laws. Yeah.
yeah, you need to, but
Yeah.
these here contractors, you want to do something, you could
Yeah,
just
you
go
can't
up and
get
do.
a permit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or license.
yeah.
Yeah. I know. I know. My dad, he was a priest, but he was also a contractor. I know. It's weird. It's a weird mix. He was a priest, but he was also a roofer, you know. He was a roofer, but he also worked with the union. So he worked in contracting and did some work. So I'm familiar with how that stuff works as well. And how even from my experience in working in the industry, I had one guy who used to work for a builder. All right. And then he wanted to become his own builder. So he just had to apply for the license to be a contractor, to be for the doing the building. And then a lot of times people start their own construction business. They pay the permit for the license to have their construction business, and they don't do any work. They subcontract everything out to other companies to do the work for them. So basically, they just work as this is my company. I'm going to do the construction here. So basically, I'm going to hire this contractor to do this contractor to do that, and that contractor to do that. And I'm going to negotiate with them. Okay. And that's how they do it. So yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. It's kind of crazy that they don't have to take any tests or anything like that, though. I figured that they did. No, not like auto mechanics, right? Well, actually, you don't need to take any tests really to become an auto mechanic either, but you should. I guess if you want to become ASE certified, you do. Are there anything like that with builders, that if they need to get some kind of a certification, they need to take a test?
No.
No? Wow. No wonder why there's so much shoddy construction. I've come across some new construction buildings that didn't have a right angle in them. All right. Guess that's a builder's joke. Okay, so let's see. So who enforces that? That's DCA inspectors. They do the building, when they enforce the code, they're talking about building codes. And the Uniform Construction Code requires a construction permit by each meter. Okay, so this is everything that we've repeated already on the previous two slides. We're just highlighting it here now in the book. And this goes over all those instructions that I had in the previous one about issuing the permits in 20 days, going before the Construction Board of Appeals, and when the permits can be revoked, etc. So Doris, you work for a contractor, a builder? Or...
Yeah.
Yeah. You ever have cities mess with you guys with the 20 days to get the permits?
Yeah. Linden, East Windsor, Raritan, Bridgewater, they're pretty good. Old Bridge is pretty good. It depends on the town.
Yeah. All right. Oh, everybody get that before I change it?
Good.
All right, now a certificate of occupancy, after you get the building permits and the work gets done, that work needs to then be inspected to make sure it's up to snuff. So you got to get a CO, a certificate of occupancy. A certificate of occupancy makes sure that everything was done up to code and that there is no condition that would cause a threat to the health or safety of any occupants of a structure before you get the permit to actually use it. Okay, so that's a certificate of occupancy. They often refer to it as a CO permit or CO inspection. It must be done before the building is used or occupied. The inspection would be required for new construction or for existing buildings when additional work is performed, or for simple transfers of ownership without any construction being done. Now, some municipalities, they call all of those inspections a CO. Some of them actually use the different designated names that there is for them. You have a CO, it's supposed to be just for new construction. A COC, or certificate of compliance, for existing structures that get work done on them. That's what that inspection would be called. And if no work is done and it's just a simple transfer of ownership that's taking place, it's a CCO, a continued certificate of occupancy. And that's required in the majority of municipalities in the state. Not all of them, but the majority of them. When there's only a change of ownership. Okay. Now you may go to some towns and ask for a CCO, and they'll be like, "Huh?" Yeah. They call them all CO. They're all CO inspection. That's all they know. It's all CO inspection. What do you need the CO inspection for? Is it new construction, existing, or just a transfer? And that's what they'll ask you. You know, instead of having the three different names for the three different types of inspections. Okay. So don't be a stickler for the rules because the municipalities aren't. And you can see that here. No new or altered buildings in New Jersey can be used or occupied until a certificate of occupancy has been issued. And down over here, under existing buildings, they'll tell you a certificate of continuing occupancy, the COC, if any work has been done. Sorry, I muted myself. If any work has been done on an existing structure. And then on the next page, 348, okay, we get the certificate of, okay, oh, that is certificate of occupancy. Okay. We already have it broken down. All right, now, smoke detectors are required on each level of a building and within 10 feet of any sleeping quarters, according to state law. Carbon monoxide detectors with 10-year sealed, non-replaceable batteries must be installed as of 2019 change in the law. You can't have those carbon monoxide detectors that have replaceable batteries in them. It has to be a 10-year sealed battery that's non-replaceable. Homes built after 1978 also required the detectors to be hardwired. So hardwired with that battery backup. Now, most municipalities require one on each level of the carbon monoxide detectors. However, local municipalities may have a stricter requirement. I find that many local fire enforcement officials, fire inspectors, they require you to have one on every floor of the house, in the basement, on the first floor, second floor, whatever. And within 10 feet of any sleeping quarters, you got to have that smoke and carbon monoxide detector. So if you have combination units where there's smoke, fire, carbon detectors, well, one on each level and within 10 feet of any sleeping quarter. And fire extinguishers have been, as of March this year, our governor just arbitrarily did away with the requirement for fire extinguishers. However, a lesson that I learned when I just did a recent closing is even though the state no longer requires fire extinguishers, your local fire enforcement official may still require it. You know, I thought that they just didn't update their paperwork and this guy didn't have the fire extinguisher in the kitchen. I'm like, you don't need those anymore anyway. We did the inspection. We failed the inspection because it didn't have the fire inspection because Woodbridge still wanted you to have the fire extinguisher installed in the kitchen. It has to be under 10 pounds, rated to put out ABC type fires, installed in the kitchen with the hardware that it came with, or within 10 feet of the kitchen. And this was as a result of, I think I'll have it on the next slide, Don. Yeah. I'll give you that little story, the background of where that requirement came from. So in New Jersey, a change of occupancy for any one family or two family dwelling requires the building have smoke detectors on each level of the dwelling and within 10 feet of every sleeping quarter. The state also requires at least one properly installed carbon monoxide detector and an approved fire extinguisher. Well, the change there is that the state no longer requires the fire extinguisher. Your local municipality may. They removed that as a state inspection requirement. So what can I do to this slide to change that wording there? I could just add in there that's only a requirement for the municipality. No longer a state requirement. Can't really fit in there much more. Oh, actually, you know what? I may be able to. State requirement. Wherever. Okay, what can I do with this? I can just highlight them. How about that? There we go. Now it's visible. Okay. So how did that law ever come into effect as a state requirement? Which it's no longer a state requirement because Governor Murphy just canceled it for no apparent reason. Well, back in 2005, we had acting Governor Richard Codey. There was a rash of instances where children were reaching up when their parents were cooking in the kitchen and grabbing at the handles on the stove. And then the grease poured onto the child and they broke out into flames. So the parents' natural first reaction is to try to put the fire out and throw water on them. Worst thing you could do with a grease fire. It spreads the fire. So there was a rash of these instances happening within a short period of time. So acting governor Richard Cody was attending elementary schools, with the fire safety, with the fire officials, trying to promote Fire Safety Day in school. Remember that when you went to school? Well, the governor was there at the school, and they were talking about the rash of these fires that were occurring. So it's very important to have these, what do you call it? How to respond to the fires. And on a suggestion of a fifth grader suggested, how come you don't just make it a law that requires a fire extinguisher be in all the kitchens? I guess he said, that's a good idea. And so that he passed a law, that required those, a small fire extinguisher under 10 pounds. That's easy for anybody to handle so they could grab and react really quick instead of those big, heavy ones. That's rated to put out ABC type fires. That's under 10 pounds. So type A fires are trash, wood, and paper. Type B put out liquids, gases, and solvents that are flammable. And type C is for electrical fires. So the fire extinguishers that are rated to put out A, B, C type fires. Okay. It's no longer a state requirement, but it still is in most municipalities. All right, so now let's move over to the Hotel Motel Multiple Dwelling Health and Safety Law. This was enacted to ensure residents of New Jersey have decent standards and safe units of dwelling space. The state inspection is often referred to as the green card inspection. At least that's the industry lingo for it. It must be performed at least once every 5 years, and it applies to buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit the owner lives in. What do those tenants also need to be given? They need to be given something else too, other than this inspection. What do these buildings tenants have to be given?
The renter's book.
The Truth in Renting booklet, correct. Now, hotels and motels with 10 or more units or dwelling spaces for sleeping quarters for 25 or more people are required to have a state inspection once every 3 years. And they often do spot inspections without appointments. So if you're going to be into selling a motel or a hotel, just be aware, make sure that the building had its inspection and everything's up to code. Because when state inspectors come in, they always find stuff wrong. Okay. So it's a good idea when selling those buildings with 3 or more units, those 3 family or 3 family houses or 4 family houses, that you make sure that they had those green card inspection and everything's up to date and it's not about to expire. And the same thing for hotels and motels, because otherwise there could be a lot of expense. In order to pass the inspection, they may require a lot of work to be done. So looking out, buyers agents should be looking out for their clients and making sure that those inspections cards are up to date, those inspections are up to date. So you as a listing agent, you should also ask the owner of these properties when getting the inspection, how current is the green card? Is it about to expire or has it recently been renewed? If it's been recently renewed, it's fine. If it's about to expire, tell them, arrange for the inspection, because any buyer's agent's going to want it inspected and they're going to want that work done to bring it up to code. Okay, so let's do the highlights in the book pertaining to that. On page 348. And that'll be the end of this chapter. And then we get into the key terms to review.
Ready.
Okay. That's done. This chapter is done. Chapter 18 is done. Let's do the key terms to review. There's only one of them, but it's a long one. There's 18. Charges to the developer for extra roads, schools, and so forth.
Impact fees.
Impact fees, 7 is A. Test of soils absorption and drainage capacities.
EIS.
No. A test of the soil, how well the soil absorbs liquids. Remember the video from this old house?
Percolation test.
A percolation or perk test. 10 is B. That'll always be on exams. Division of property into more than one building lot.
Subdivision.
16 is C. Community with dense zoning and developers plan for entire land use.
Clustering.
Called a planned unit development, or a PUD for short. 12 is D. Group setting standards for local subdivisions. What's the group that sets the standards for local subdivisions to abide by?
Planning board.
The planning board. 13 is E. A halt to development in an area is referred to as
Moratorium.
a moratorium. 9 is F. New Jersey standards for building.
UCC, the Uniform Construction Code.
17 is G. The United States requirement for some developments to be registered with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
The Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act.
Yes, 8 is H. State regulations for builders of new homes.
Warranty and Builders Registration Act.
18 is I, correct. Permits buyers up to 7 calendar days to cancel contracts for the lease or purchase of such lands.
The Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act.
Correct. 15 is J. A law requiring registration of certain developments within New Jersey.
Planned Real Estate Development Act.
11 is K. Zoning that allows more living units per acre than usual. We pack them in.
Density zoning.
Density zoning. 5 is L. Map of a town, section, or subdivision. What do we call that map?
A plat.
A plat map, or just a plat. Correct. 14 is M. New Jersey state agency that approves and registers some out-of-state properties. What do we call that agency? It's actually within the division, within the Real Estate Commission.
The Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales.
The Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales Control. 1 is N. And as far as I know, it's only one guy down there. His job is to travel all over the country to these different states that are having these uh, timeshares and such like that they want to advertise in New Jersey. They got to pay for his expenses, his travel, his meals, his hotel stays, all that stuff, while he goes over their paperwork before they get the permit to advertise in New Jersey. So one is N. Local municipalities authorization for building plans. What do you need to get before you could do any building?
Construction permit.
There you go. 3 is O. Engineering reports often required before building permits are issued.
EIS.
The EIS, the Environmental Impact Studies, is correct. 6 is P. Turning over of private property, subdivision streets, for example, to a municipality. What do you call it when a private person gives land to the government for a public use like streets, schools, and parks?
Dedication.
Dedication. They dedicate that land. 4 is Q. And putting living units close together to leave more open space. That is referred to as
Clustering.
clustering. 2 is R. And that completes chapter 18.